Story 1. I don't do nights anymore, but for years I worked nights in residential care facilities. One of the spookiest experiences was in a soul-charged dementia facility. I was responsible for 15 D3 residents, with no one else to help me keep an eye on them all. Around 3 a.m., after doing an intentional round, where you check that all residents are safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. I got a sudden wave of goosebumps because this was a secure facility and it was the middle of the night. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. I dismissed it as a hallucination. 10 minutes later, it rang again. I was terrified. I went back to the window and checked again. No one was there, but I noticed a strange car parked across the street. I took a photo of it just in case, then returned to my station where I'd been playing a game of match the card suits with a delightful but very confused lady. I sat down and she looked at me saying, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" He looked like he had a bad night and needs a cuppa. Chills went down my spine, but I brushed it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady was particularly prone to being disoriented in time and place. The doorbell rang again less than 5 minutes later, and this time I was really freaking out. Another resident was up and walking the hallway, painting, with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I passed him on the way to the front window, and he turned to me and said, "Don't answer the door alone. He might hurt you," before carrying on painting. I was terrified and trying not to cry. I didn't know what to do. I was a single 23-year-old woman in charge of 15 people with varying stages of dementia, and the doorbell kept ringing in the middle of the night. It was a weekend, so my on-call supervisor wouldn't answer the phone. She never did on weekends. I looked out the window and saw the same car as before. As I was looking around, I saw a shadow move in front of the door, and a person walked around the corner and looked straight in the window next to me. We made eye contact, and I screamed. My residents started freaking out, I was freaking out, and the guy just bolted. I called the police, and they arrived. It was chaos because all 15 residents had been woken by the commotion and now had 2 police officers in their space. My on-call supervisor still wasn't answering her phone, and I was struggling to manage the whole situation. Eventually, after many cups of tea and Milo and 2 doses of PRN medication for the more challenging residents, we mostly settled down. It was now 7 a.m., and the handover shift arrived with a nurse and a caregiver. I told them what happened, and they informed me that a woman down the road had her house broken into and was attacked in her bed by a drug seeker who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I had an internal meltdown because we had drugs in the cupboard in the bedroom. Good drugs too, morphine, methadone, fentanyl, etc. I couldn't help but wonder if he was intentionally looking for us and just took the next best option. For reference, the facility was an old converted boarding house in a gentrified area with lots of old doctors' houses nearby. It was easy to mistake the home I worked at for a regular house. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite it being understaffed, according to best practice guidelines. I hadn't thought about this in maybe 5 years. Wow. Story 2, I work in a prison. When I was new, I was working overtime one night in a housing unit that had seen a lot of deaths. It was well after midnight, and all of the offenders were supposed to be in their cells. Since this was a medium security prison, the offenders still had access to leave their cells to use the communal bathroom at night. I was going in for the 2 a.m. count when I watched an offender walk down the stairs from the second level and into the bathroom. I stood at the entrance to the bathroom and called in, asking which cell they were from so I could add an extra body to that cell for my count. I got no answer. I then walked into the bathroom and searched everywhere, but found absolutely nobody. I told one of my coworkers about what happened, and the first thing they asked me was he tall and skinny with long dreads? And he had been. When I answered yes, I was told, "That's Mr. Bones. He killed himself a few years ago, but he still hangs around." I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Story 3, the school custodian's encounter. I was working as a night shift custodian at a middle school. I cleaned a long U-shaped wing full of classrooms every weeknight. I'd already locked up one set of doors to the wing and was about to lock the ones at the other end of the U. I had made the full lap around the wing, cleaning there all night alone, and came to the end of the hallway where the doors to the rest of the school were. When I shut the lights off, I saw the dark silhouette of what looked like a child run across the end of the hallway from left to right. There were doors down there, but I'd just locked them all up and no one was around. I was so creeped out that I locked the doors connecting the wing to the rest of the school and ran to my car. I always felt like I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye working there at night, but that was the most visible, definite thing I saw at that place. Story 4, I worked for a moving company, restocking the trucks based on supplies they would need that morning. It's a terrible job. Never work for a moving company. Do not do it. Anyway, I was stocking a truck pulled up to the dock when I realized my vision was getting fuzzy. I thought I was just tired, so I rubbed my eyes. My forearm felt wet, but I figured it was sweat and my vision cleared. It happened again. I rubbed my eyes and my forearm felt wet again. I finally looked at my arm to see hundreds of crushed baby spiders. My vision wasn't fuzzy. Baby spiders were crawling on my eyelashes. I was covered in baby spiders. I ran to the nearest water hose and washed everything off. The next morning, I had lots of tiny bites on my legs, but otherwise nothing else. Story 5, I used to work in the Texas desert in Midland, technically Goldsmith, at a warehouse where we shipped drilling motors and collars and other drilling accessories to rigs. Usually, it was just me and one other guy. To set the scene, it's a 1.5 miles down a desert dirt road to get to the dimly lit warehouse, and we'd arrive around 7 in the evening. I'd gotten there around 7 and did the usual routine. Paint the received tools, do inventory, then play Xbox until a night truck would come for me to load or unload. The other guy, let's call him James, was always late, but he was the boss, and I didn't really mind the peace and quiet. He was never later than 8 though, so around 9:45 when he didn't show up, I tried to call him. He'd gotten drunk and said he'd be in when he felt like it, so I just kept playing Xbox. About 2 a.m., I heard one of the side doors open. I assumed it was either James or a driver, but it was a side door all the way at the end of the warehouse. I looked out the office window and saw a guy who wasn't James and wasn't a driver I recognized. I asked from across the way if he was a driver, but he didn't say anything, so I assumed someone was messing with me. The guy looked at me and deadpan asked, "Do you believe in Jesus, our Lord and Savior?" The only thing I could think was, I guess I'm about to meet him. Thankfully, this guy was harmless and just wanted $20. He told me about his heroin struggles and said he just needed $20 for a bus. I think about that night all the time because it could have easily been my last. He could have dumped me in the desert, and it would have taken days for me to be found. I know this because it happens all the time. Thankfully, I've gotten away from the absolute worst part of Texas and now have a much safer job. Story 6. 2 things happened when I was an overnight baker in a downtown area. 1. Parking overnight is free in this downtown area but can be crowded. First come, first served. One night I parked a block away, and as I was walking to my job, this young guy was riding his bike around me in my car. He followed me close to my job, but I was quickly able to get into the building. That morning when my boss came in at 4 a.m., he told me about his weird experience with this kid on a bike riding around him in his car. This guy did this for a few days until the weekend, getting closer each time. The last time, he tried to hit my boss with his bike, but my boss managed to hop between 2 vehicles and walk away safely. We never saw that guy again. 2. In summer, I would sit outside on a well-lit and busy side street. At the opposite end was a federal building with nothing between us but solid buildings. One night I was relaxing when I looked towards the federal building and saw a person completely in shadow walking my way. Even walking under the streetlight, I couldn't see the features of this person. I quickly went inside and waited from a somewhat hidden position to see who passed. No one passed at all in the next 10 minutes. I've never felt such malevolence from a person who was just walking. It still bothers me 15 years later. Story 7. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine who worked at a water treatment plant on the graveyard shift. From what I understand, he was there to check levels, adjust stuff, and make sure nothing blew up. Just him. The access doors were unlocked, but he was inside an 8-foot-tall, locked barbed wire fence. This place was next to a highway connecting 2 cities an hour away from each other. with not much in between. About 2:30 to 3 a.m., he was killing time, playing his Nintendo DS when he heard a voice from behind him yell, "Get on the ground!" My friend went cold and complied. He was held at gunpoint. This guy tied him up with duct tape, all while saying he was sorry he had to do this, and stole the keys to his truck, his wallet, cards, etc. He heard the guy drive off, waited a while longer, and finally called the police. The guy was arrested later that day. Turns out he had escaped from inmate custody in the next town over and was desperate. He'd probably been walking for hours. My friend honestly had PTSD of sorts from it for a while, but he still works there. Story 8, I was working as campus security and had to close down the main law school building. The building was downtown in a major city and was old enough that the tunnels underneath it were used in the Underground Railroad. Think dirt floors and wooden cross beams, like you would imagine a mine. There was work going on in the tunnels. I think they were reinforcing the supports. As part of my routine, I had to go around and check to make sure the building was vacant. I climbed down the ladder into the tunnels. All the contractor lights were off. I called out a few, "Hello, anyone here?" and shone my flashlight around. After a moment of silence, I heard what sounded like a radio tune from the 1920s coming from the tunnel. I immediately climbed the ladder, padlocked the trap door, armed the motion sensors, and left. No way was I sticking around for that. Story 9. I was alone in an arena doing security. I had to avoid our exhibit area in the backline hallway because it always sounded like there were high heels following you, probably the HVSC. One of our elevators randomly opened almost every time I walked by. It was towards the end of my route when doing my hourly walk around the building, so it freaked me out enough that I only went upstairs if I had to. I had some lighting work to do, so I was about 40 feet in the air when something caught the corner of my eye. I looked over at our balcony area, which only has one way in and out, and next to one of the seats, I swear I saw someone crouched down staring at me. One of my co-workers had been known to tell ghost stories about the place, so I was sure it was him. For the next hour, I kept seeing the person moving around and hiding in different areas of the balcony, and I swear I heard stifled laughter. I had shouted that I could see them and that I knew who it was. So this time, when I did my hourly lap, I did the building as thoroughly and quietly as I could. What had previously taken 15 minutes tops was now taking me 2 hours. I started with that damn balcony. I even booby-trapped the elevator so I could hear someone trying to get by and snuck up the fire escape. There is no possible way someone was up there, and I didn't cross paths with them. To this day, I swear he was there to mess with my head, but I can't figure out how he got past me to leave the balcony. Later, everyone in the shop started going off about the creepy things that had happened to them. The co-worker in question started talking about the one person who died there, how he was found, and how he thinks the guy is still rocking out to the concert from nearly a decade ago. I think my favorite story was about a kid who worked there part-time a while back. He lived an hour or two away and had a night shift followed by a morning shift, so he decided to just sleep in the balcony on the other side of the arena. He looked really shaken the next morning. When asked about it, he said something happened and he didn't want to talk about it. He refused to go up there for like a week before going to the boss in a panic with his keys, saying he just couldn't be there anymore. Allegedly, they checked the cameras and just saw him go into the room at night, then creep across the hall to the bathroom and back, then walk to the elevator to clock in, acting shifty like someone was following him the whole way. Story 10. Back when I was a healthcare assistant, HCA, I was doing my hourly breathing rounds, just poking my head into the doorways, sometimes turning on the nightlight to make sure residents were okay. About halfway down the hall, I saw a resident sitting up at the edge of her bed facing the doorway. I asked if she was all right and if she needed anything. She was looking down, and as she looked up, her head kind of twisted from side to side. She maintained eye contact with me and, in a hoarse voice, replied, "Helen isn't here anymore." I ran to the nursing station and reported to the nurse. The nurse looked at me and kind of chuckled, saying it was impossible as the resident was a total assist, basically immobile, and not very verbal. We made our way down there anyway. Not even 2 minutes had gone by. The resident was tucked nicely in her bed, snoring away as though nothing had happened. Story 11. Well, I know you're likely looking for ghost stories, but here's a realistic scare. I was walking in the winter in northern-ish Canada to my night shift at a factory. This was around the turn of the century, so I didn't have a cell phone on me. It was around 6:30 p.m., which is well past dark at that time of year here. The roads in the industrial neighborhood had no sidewalks, so I was walking on the road. It was all rippled ice because big rigs drove on it, packing the snow so hard it became like ice, leaving deep grooves where the tires hit and higher areas elsewhere. So it was slippery and uneven. I'm tall and I walk fast, so I guess there was a lot of momentum in my stride. A couple of blocks from work, I wiped out awkwardly and flew up into the air, landing with a lot of force flat on my back. I couldn't move. I lay there in the dark, the nearest people inside warehouses and factories too far to hear me scream, even if they happened to go outside for a bit of air, so I never bothered trying to call out. I felt very helpless. It was minus 20 degrees Celsius, and lying flat on the ice was making me pretty cold. But what scared me most wasn't the cold. It was the idea that a big rig could come through at any moment, and the driver would not be expecting pedestrians, much less one lying down. Terror that I was about to be crushed to death released adrenaline, and using all my willpower, I managed to hurl my body as hard as I could, which resulted in a little squirm bringing me to my side. Another Herculean effort got me another wriggle. After a brief rest, I managed another little lurch and then collapsed again, hoping I was close enough to the gutter to be safe if a truck came. I lay there about 10 minutes more before, to my great relief, the shock to my spine or whatever had immobilized me wore off, and I could get up and finish walking to work. I could have frozen to death or been crushed by a truck, lying there barely able to control my body. I suppose if I'd landed just a bit harder, I could have been knocked out, and then I likely would have died. I still always liked the serenity of that commute, walking alone through an area with no other pedestrians and almost no vehicle traffic. But I must admit it isn't perfectly safe.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.